Drumroll, please.
For like 3 years.
It is the long-awaited Piëchisode.
It is. After last week's primer, in which we discussed the vehicles that we used to highlight the career of Ferdinand Piëch, this is the episode in which we discuss his career at a fairly high, sometimes fairly low level, and all of the great impact that he had on automobiledom.
Trust me, if you don't care about any Volkswagen product or something you think might be associated with Ferdinand Piëch, you should listen to this episode because it's a story of one of the people in this industry who has defined all of the cars that we love. So many of the characteristics transcend just the cars that
one of the most impactful single individuals on the automobile ever, I would argue.
And one of the very few who only cared about product, making better cars for us.
Yeah.
Just
this episode of the Carmudgeon Show, which is part of the Haggerty Podcast Network, presented by Jason
Cammisa
and Derek
Tam-Scott. Oh, we're getting good at saying at the same time. If you like this content, please consider joining the Haggerty Drivers Club, which includes unlimited flatbed towing for all of your classic cars, a subscription to our award-winning magazine, VIP events, discounts on cool shit, and also unlimited access to our valuation tools. There's a link below.
And don't forget also on Samsung TV to watch us on channel 1194, which is an unnerving experience for me, but is
to see yourself on television?
Yeah.
It's an unnerving experience for me to see you on television too. Please clap. No, I mean like huge round of applause. We finally did it. It's the Piëchisode. Yay!
That was my worst clap ever.
I'm just going to make a lot of noise until we go to the sound. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the last ever episode of the Carmudgeon Show. We finally did it.
Finally doing the Piëchisode.
Yeah. I think
so.
Long enough.
Per our agreement,
did we?
Per our guaranteed or the assumption that the public has made that the Piëchisode will be the last episode we ever do.
Yeah, they've all sort of thought that because we've been promising it for so many years and haven't done it. And,
well, here it is. And there it goes.
There it goes.
All right.
Bye.
Well, thank you.
Shit. So hopefully by now you've all seen the episode of Icons.
The Icons,
the Icons episode, which is the thing that allowed us to finally take the time to do this.
Yes.
And you haven't seen it yet.
No, I haven't.
Okay. So he has not yet seen it. You guys know something Derek doesn't. That's a first. Yeah, it was a great episode. Absolutely loved it. I've definitely seen it also myself because it certainly exists now that we're recording it. Okay, let's talk about Dr. Ferdinand Piëch.
Gottvater.
Which in German is actually Pate. Der Pate, Pate, is Godfather.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so unfortunately that didn't work. But you can't steal the Godfather logo. By the way, you can buy the shirt. There's going to be a link below. It's a really badly done hoodie that... it's very comfy though. Mm-hmm. It's nice. You're chilly and I'm very warm because I have a Piëchisode official merch hoodie on. I'm just trying to make a buck. Sue me. Please don't sue me.
This message has not been endorsed by
anyone ever, and there's no trademarks in here. Shut up. Dr. Ferdinand Piëch. Ab jetzt werde ich die ganze Zeit auf Deutsch sprechen. No, I'm sorry.
This whole episode?
No. Could you imagine? I should just do one in German. I'll do bad for all you German speakers out there. I'm just going to badly translate what Derek says, and by badly I mean purposefully and accurately. Interpretively.
Okay.
Ich hasse Porsche 911. Sorry, I hate Porsche 911s. I said okay. Ferdinand Piëch, born to Anton Piëch. Which is his father, and Louise Porsche.
She was Piech at the time.
Maybe she was a hoe. Maybe she got knocked up. I don't know.
That's why they got married.
Okay. His mom was born Louise Porsche. Mm-hmm. She's the son of... She's the daughter... Okay, so once upon a time where there was a guy named Ferdinand Porsche. Mm-hmm. Ferdinand Porsche was an inventor and he did a bunch of amazing things. Mm-hmm. And then had a kid who we also called Ferdinand Porsche, but we don't call him Ferdinand, we call him Ferry.
Yep.
Ferry Porsche is the guy who made the car company we know of, today's Porsche.
Yes.
The original.
Ferdinand Porsche worked at Mercedes and designed the SS, the Model S, the SS, and the SSK. Yeah, he also worked for the SS. Und Gestapo. And he did a variety of engineering projects and was one of the most respected engineers. He also designed a product called the Volkswagen Beetle, but it was at that time called the Volkswagen Beetle. It was called the Kraft durch Freude Wagen, which is the strength through joy car.
Okay, that was the Nazi propaganda speak, but yes. The idea was it was just called the Volkswagen, which was the Wagen for the Volk.
Yeah, Wagen for the Volks.
For das Volk.
People's car, yes. And in 1951, he died.
End of story. Done.
No. I mean, after the war, he was imprisoned and some war crime stuff. Trials happened, although I don't think he was found guilty, but he was in a French prison for a while. And after the war, he died in 1951. And his son remained, they had, his son in his absence started a sports car company called Porsche in 1948 in Austria, because the historical home of the Porsche company in a certain area of Stuttgart called Zuffenhausen was occupied for some reason by some Americans.
It's World War II or one, or I don't know.
One
Maybe you've heard of it. Anyway.
Yes.
Okay, so Porsche, the Porsche sports car company was Generation 2, Ferdinand Porsche the second.
Yes. And then there was a third Ferdinand Porsche, who is known as Alexander or Butzi.
Because he was Ferdinand Alexander Porsche.
Yeah.
Right? He's Butzi.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the three Ferdinand Porsches. And then there's Ferdinand Piëch. And so second Ferdinand Porsche, Ferry, had two children.
Well, he had a sister.
I'm sorry, Jesus Christ, yes. He had a sister named Louise.
Yes.
Louise shacked up with some guy named
Anton
Piëch, and they had a Ferdinand themselves. There's so many fucking Ferdinands in this whole thing.
Yeah, there's four of them.
Yeah. And so Butzi and Ferdinand Piëch were first cousins.
Yep.
2.5 years apart, I think they were, something like that.
Sounds right.
And Butzi developed the 911. He was the sort of
designer
of the 911.
Yes.
Piëch was in college. He graduated 22, I think he was. Already had like 67 children.
In Switzerland?
In the Schweiz.
If you're using Schweizerdeutsch,
Schweizerdeutsch,
Schweizerdeutsch. In the Schweiz.
I didn't know you spoke Schweizerdeutsch.
I don't.
Okay. I don't?
I don't.
Oh, no. So you're like crazy Scottish or something. Yes. Piëch graduated with an engineering degree and went to go work for Porsche in the racing department. Right when he graduated. At this point, the 911 was 6 months away from production. It was effectively done. And Piëch said, no, wait, stop. What the fuck are you morons doing? In Austrian, of course. And probably
Austrian accented.
Yeah, I can't do an Austrian
German
accent.
It should also be said he studied aeronautical engineering in university, and his intent was to go work in an aerospace company. But at that era, I guess it was somewhat difficult for him as a German to do so. He, for whatever reason, was unable to get a job working in aerospace. So he went instead and worked at Porsche.
Running racing department. His first contribution in his career effectively was pointing out that if they were trying to race the 911, they were going to have to put a dry sump in the engine. And so he went over to Hans Metzger. Maybe you've heard of him. Oh no, I'm going to do the sneeze thing.
Gesundheit.
Oh, Dankeschön.
Bitte schön.
He went over to Metzger and was like, yo, Metzi, you need to put a dry sump in that thing. And you got to think 6 months away from production, the car's done. And they actually did stop and about face. He was able to convince everyone that they needed to stop and re-engineer the Metzger engine to have a dry sump.
And I think he was not initially in racing. I think he was actually in a sort of engineering role, and he inherited, based on his competence, control of the racing department. And so then he was responsible for the 906 and basically all of these successive Porsche racing cars in the late 60s, which, the 906 uses that same engine, the 911 engine, in an advanced form, but it's a 2-liter flat six. And then they are also coming out with this is always very confusing, but the successor to the 906 was the 910, and then after that came the 907, and then the 908. And so the 908 was the final evolution of these cars, which ran in usually 2 or 3 liter displacement limit classes, and depending on the event, could contest for overall victories if the event was sort of the right type of event. And certainly in hill climbs, they could do that. But in terms of endurance racing in the prototype class, none of these cars were ever able to win, of course, the most prestigious race, which was Le Mans. And they could win, the 1,000 miles of Nürburgring, or 1,000 kilometers, of Nürburgring, and, probably Brands Hatch and various other things, but Le Mans remained elusive. Right. And so Ferdinand Piëch, who is now in a position of control, basically responsible for the racing department, says, we really need, in order to compete with, at this time, it is, we're in the late 60s. So it had previously been Ferrari with the 330 P4, and then, of course, the famous rivalry with Ford. And so Ford successively wins Le Mans 4 times with, cars that were displacing, by the end, 7 liters and 427 cubic inches. And Porsche's out there with their 3-liter flat 8. And it's just, for 24 hours, you just can't maintain the pace, especially with the kind of specific outputs they were getting out of the 3-liter cars. So he said, we need a clean sheet design. Ferrari is going to continue to do this with 12-cylinder cars. We need a 12-cylinder car that is... I think they were 4.9 liters. I don't know if that was the initial displacement, but basically Porsche does a complete clean sheet design, like a 917, which Piëch is responsible for. And finally,
which was effectively 2 flat sixes joined with a central power takeoff, right?
With the timing gear in the middle. Finally, Porsche wins Le Mans in 70 for the first time, and then they do it again in 71. I can't remember where they won in 72.
I thought they skipped a year. I thought it was 70, 72. Either way.
They won twice with the 917 at Le Mans. And then they also added turbochargers to it, although this is really after Piëch has left.
Right.
So then the other thing that happens is that, and there was personality conflict, I would say, between Piëch and his cousin, and also his uncle, whose company it is. His uncle, Ferry, was pretty frugal. He'd been coming of age and exercising business during World War II, and they had really had a bit of a struggle in the early post-war years. They didn't move back to Stuttgart until 1951, I think, after the occupation allowed that. And so he was sort of frugal, and while he liked the idea of winning Le Mans, the cost of a complete clean sheet prototype 12-cylinder car was enormous. And
they did a prototype 16 also. I mean,
They did also do that, correct. And so we are already seeing the hallmarks of Piëchdom, which is just this like engineering and product and whatever it takes to crush the opposition at all costs.
Well, at the end,
mindset.
Sort of opposite of simplify and add lightness, and doing more with less. Piëch's philosophy was always do more with more.
Yes.
Right? Throw everything at it.
And the 917 reflected that. And as a result, I think there was various personality clashes. I think, what was the number of family members that were involved in management at that company? It was like 6 or something?
6 out of the 8. So that they're all talking about the second generation. The first generation being Ferdinand, with the second Ferdinand, so Ferry.
Yes.
And it was 6 out of the 8 siblings were
cousins.
Cousins. I'm sorry, of that second generation were in senior management positions at the company.
Yeah, Peter Porsche, I think, was doing production, and Buzzi is doing design, and Piëch is doing motorsport, and then there's Ferry there, and it's all just. And then it should also be added that his sister Louise Piëch has the complete Austrian distributorship, effectively, for both Porsche and more critically Volkswagen cars, and so that's a huge cash cow. And so there's all this conflict and infighting, and I think there was this sort of group dynamics specialist meeting that was supposed to have everybody sort of unfuck everything, and the outcome from that was that everyone decided that no one in the family would have a management role anymore, and they would hire professional managers to oversee things.
You're talking about unfucking, and here was the problem.
Yes.
Not only were 6 of the 8 of them fucking around at work, but Piëch was fucking his cousin's wife. I mean, okay, Piëch wound up marrying and having 3 children with Gert Porsche's wife, who was his cousin's wife. Like, they weren't all just arguing with each other at work. Clearly, there was a lot of family dynamics going on here.
Correct.
That's not going to end well.
And so
actually,
I
it was
think
his mom.
Oh, was it?
His mom was instrumental in saying, you know what, enough of this shit. If you are a Porsche, i.e. bloodline, mother or father side, you are now prohibited from being in any management position at the company. And so it's not just, hey, we're going to fire a manager or hire managers. Everyone who was a Porsche was kicked out.
Yes.
So Piëch's thank you for winning Le Mans twice was get out.
Yes.
Go fuck your cousin's wife.
So Ferry Porsche became, chairman of the supervisory board or something like that. Some role that allowed him to maintain effectively control while everybody else in the second generation had to fuck off. And so Bootsy started FA Porsche Design, which is the company that makes luggage and fountain pens and whatever else. Sunglasses. And at this point, Ferdinand Piëch leaves Porsche.
Yep.
More or less never to return.
Kind of.
In any
official
managing capacity.
Which is going to suck. I mean, he starts out, his first contribution was a seriously important one. Right?
Yes.
And,
for 60 strength to strength, winning races and then eventually Le Mans. And he does this all by the time that he's, 30 or so.
Mm-hmm. Pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Because, I don't even think he was close, 27 probably by 70, 71.
Yeah.
He was 22 when he started in 64, 65. So, so what does he do? He goes and says, all right, I'm going to set up my own engineering consulting business. Mm-hmm. And his first customer was Mercedes-Benz. Who had
the 220D diesel engine passenger car in the 115 chassis.
I don't know those chassis codes at all.
It's the predecessor of the 123.
And they needed more power. And so they contracted him to effectively add a cylinder to that 4-cylinder diesel, making the world's first production 5-cylinder passenger car diesel engine. Or first piston engine, period.
Yes, with 5 cylinders.
First 5-cylinder engine. That was the OM617. OM617.
And this becomes the 300D, and this is the things that you still see kicking around with all the 300D, usually turbo diesels from the 80s, because they used that engine in the 115, or I forget, 114. One of those designations is for 6 cylinders, one of those for 4, and I forget where the 5s go. Anyway, in 2 generations of that car, plus the 2 generations of S-Class, the 116 and 126.
And 123. I mean, it became the world's first production turbocharged diesel engine in the 300SD turbo.
Yes, in the 116.
1978, I believe. But that's the engine that, everyone always jokes is going to be around when the cockroaches are going to be driving those old Mercedes diesels. The funny thing is they had a lot of teething problems. Mm-hmm. They were early on, they broke a lot. But it was an achievement. And it was enough for actually that Mercedes-Benz offered to put him in line to be the successor as the next head of R&D for all of Mercedes-Benz, which is amazing. You think now he's 30 years old. It took him 6 months to do that engine. It was him with, quote, 2.5 employees, I think it was. So he probably had 2.5 FTEs. Makes this engine in 6 months. Mercedes is so pleased that they want to put him next in line for R&D chief. And he said no. Like, who says no to Mercedes-Benz?
Yeah, especially to a role like that. He probably would have liked to have gotten the job straight away instead of be waiting in line. Well, sounds very consistent with his personality.
But the reason he gave was that the R&D budget was too small, which is hilarious.
Absurd,
right?
Because Mercedes-Benz makes the best engineered cars in the world during this period.
Yeah, but of course, we'll find out later what his ambitions are. Over the course of his career, you see, in Mercedes was too small for him. He wanted to run the entire automotive industry.
Was too small for him, as it turned out.
There's a really tasteless joke in there somewhere. I mean, he had 13 children.
Yes.
Anyway,
sired.
I
guess
mean,
is the word.
The man was horny. Which is amazing that he had 13 women. It was a strange.
Not 13 women, 13 children.
13 children from 5 women, 6 women. Very, very strange man to see speak.
Yes.
But there's one clip that I put in the Icons episode of him giving a speech, and it's genuinely the scariest thing I've ever seen. It's the scariest delivery I've ever seen anyone give ever anything. No actor has ever done that as a villain. He's intimidating. But all right, we're not there yet. So he does the Mercedes thing, and they're thrilled. He says no thanks, and then did a 3-week stint at Giugiaro.
Really?
Yeah, you know that?
No.
He worked at the design studio.
What is he doing there?
I don't know, but it only lasted 3 weeks. That was probably the reason why Giugiaro did a bunch of Audi concepts for him shortly thereafter. So, spoiler alert, he went to Audi. Audi hired him to be head of special projects, which was effectively racing and other stuff, I guess, right? R&D.
R&D, right. And so what does he do at Audi? Have you seen the US Audi ads that have Ferdinand Piëch in them speaking English?
Oh my God, I forgot about them. Years and years and years ago.
It has a 5-cylinder engine,
Yeah.
he says in the ad. It's funny.
It has a 5-cylinder engine.
What, does he give a reason why? Because it's more refined than a 4 and more.
Yeah, the 4-cylinder was more powerful. I mean, the same exact logic that they used with the OM617, which is that it's compact. And this is particularly important for the Audis. So Audi is a sort of middling. Audi basically came into existence in 1968. So it's like a fairly new company at this point, and they're looking for differentiation and products that are, it's a sort of middling company that nobody really knows what it is or what it stands for, and selling those cars was a little bit difficult, I think, at that period. And so he viewed it, I think, as something that he could mold. And I suspect that's part of the appeal and part of the reason why he didn't want to go to Mercedes is he imagined they'd be too conservative, which is, given his ambitions, was absolutely true. Audi was a fairly blank slate at that time.
And it was trying to differentiate itself with a Wankel, with a rotary.
They were working on a Wankel, and they had a longitudinal front-wheel drive arrangement, which was part of the deal. The first generation 200 I think it was the 100. And then they were basically like, in order to compete with BMW and Mercedes, we need to make something other than a 4-cylinder. And they have this longitudinal front drive arrangement, which means you can't put an inline 6 in there, and they didn't have the budget to develop a new V6. So they said, what do? We add a cylinder to the inline 4, and now we have an inline 5, which,
Same
familiar
Mercedes.
formula. And so you end up with the world's first gasoline 5-cylinder passenger car. I think it's the 100 and the 200. Both got that. Well, the 200 was available with turbocharging. So then you are coupling 5 cylinders and turbocharging together for the first time.
First time with the gas.
I think that the 205T might have predated slightly the OM617 turbo diesel. They're close.
Yeah.
It's like 76 and 77 or 77 and 78.
Yeah.
They're basically contemporary. Of course, he has nothing to do with Mercedes adding a turbo to it because he's busy at Audi. But you start to see the formula taking shape, which would eventually come to define Audi for the next 15 or 20 years, which is a turbocharged 5-cylinder engine and, as we are about to see now,
Quattro.
4-wheel drive. And those three things brought together is all Piëch, basically.
Yeah, 100%.
Doing
Well-ish, right?
things.
I mean, part of what everyone seems to agree as one of his big benefits was that while he was a great engineer and understood engineering himself, his biggest benefit was surrounding himself with the best people and then fostering their ideas and bringing them to reality. Mm-hmm. So, who knows if he came up with a 5-cylinder solution for Mercedes-Benz, doesn't matter, but he then carried that on to Audi and somebody else came up with the all-wheel drive situation. So he had an engineer
Benzinger, I think his name is.
Was testing Iltis all-wheel drive systems, which was a Volkswagen Audi.
I think they were using the Iltis as a support vehicle while they were doing winter testing for passenger cars that were front-wheel drive. And then they were like, wow, the Iltis is really good at doing this stuff, even though it has much less power than these passenger cars. And then that sort of
so the idea grew out of that, right? If the truck could...
Yeah, it's a military contracted Jeep-like thing.
Right. Why the hell couldn't the passenger cars have anything? When they're all getting stuck in the snow and the truck's got to pull them out, why don't we just give them that? And Piëch, by the accounts that I've read, just allowed Benzinger to work on this whole situation.
Yeah. And critically, I think, protected that effort from the inquiries and sort of machinations of the board and other management figures who would have been sort of found ways to meddle with it or to sort of, in other ways, adulterate.
Shut them down. Remember, Volkswagen is Audi is part of the Volkswagen group at this point. This was not an amazing time in Volkswagen's history. We're talking early 1970s. Volkswagen Beetle is at the very end of its 2 billion year run. I mean, realistically, real production 50s through 70s, now a 25-year run.
Yeah, they stopped making them in Germany in 1980. And they started producing them after the war, in 46 probably.
Right. And so by this point, you have the Mark I cars have gone into production in 1974. Volkswagen is just reinventing itself after flirting with bankruptcy. Here's this guy that comes over to Audi. They called him internally at the R&D center the Wankel Killer, because he was adamant this was never going to work. The 5-cylinder was the way to do it. 5 would fit.
He turned out to be right.
He was right. Wankel's didn't work. And he made a 5-cylinder work where a straight 6 couldn't fit in that
and
layout.
They couldn't do a V6.
And one of the surprising benefits of that weird longitudinal front-mounted engine was that Quattro, i.e. full-time all-wheel drive, was relatively easy to accomplish, because all you now had to do was add an output shaft to the back of the transmission. Remember, so you have engine is the very front of the powertrain.
The transmission directly behind it.
Well, the transaxle, right, it's a transaxle directly behind it, but with a diff directly behind the engine, and then the rest of the transmission behind that. And so if you have a hollow shaft within a shaft, you can take power from that very front differential, i.e. the output of the transmission, and push it all the way out the back through another diff, and out to the back wheels. And so by changing nothing of the layout of the front wheel drive system, you can add rear wheel drive to this car. Now you have full-time all-wheel drive. And so they started messing about, and he did purposefully hide it all from the Volkswagen board. He didn't want to hear a word that anyone was saying. And the crazy thing is that the idea behind this was not to put this for passenger cars.
No.
This was for racing.
Yes. And so, of course, famously, they were able to get the regulations changed for rally to allow 4-wheel drive.
And the plan started. They put a prototype Quattro system in one of the front-wheel drive Audis, and it turned. God, I'm going to screw up the numbers. It was 180 horsepower car. It's in the episode. It was a 180 horsepower car with Quattro, turned the same approximately lap time as a 240 horsepower car with front-wheel drive. I think it was 180, 51, 120, 180, whatever it was, almost 50% more power. And this was on dry pavement at the Hockenheim ring. So the advantage there in gravel or wet or mud or anything else, any other conditions you can incur in rally would be far, far greater than that. So that was the sort of check mark of, okay, now we know if this helps on dry pavement, it's going to help far greater. We can win races this way. So they changed the rules at rally.
And as before, we see another sort of thread here that is consistent throughout, which is motorsport. Piëch was into it.
Oh, yeah.
He believed in it as a way to develop, prove the technology, probably as a marketing tool, I imagine, as well.
Probably just prove dominance, too.
Yes, assert dominance, which was his deal.
Yeah, very much.
So Quattro ends up being quite successful. Audi wins a World Rally Championship or two.
Well, the joke was that the stunt, we talked about this last week, but the stunt that he pulled was driving up a mountain grade to show a bunch of Volkswagen engineers. There was no discussion of this first.
Execs.
The execs. They were, what did I say?
Engineers.
Probably also because it's a German company. I wasn't maybe wrong so much.
Well, the engineers were probably there because they had developed it.
They drove up the hill in the Quattro. But he did a bunch of stunts, actually. He had the local fire department soak a field and turn it into mud and make them try that. And there was a third. There were 3 sort of things that he set up as demonstrations of what Quattro could do. And it was just unequivocally yes, yes, and more yes. And that was only there. He only did this so that he can convince Volkswagen's board to allow him the development money to do it for racing. But obviously what came out of it was for street cars also. And the original plan was 400 homologation Audi Quattros for rally, and that was it.
But instead, they built them for like 11 years or something like that.
Well, every car Audi.
Well, yes, and then they put it in the 4000, and they put it in the 5000. And well, I guess that was the what were those cars called? The 80, 90, 100, and 200.
Yeah,
in Europe.
Yeah, 4,000 and 5,000 in the US. But yeah, no, that's pretty amazing that's the the birth of the four-wheel drive passenger car. It had been done twice before. Once Jensen was an Interceptor.
FF Interceptor. Yeah. Ferguson 4.
And the other one was an AMC Eagle, which was about the same time.
Late 70s, early 80s.
But yeah, the birth of the four-wheel drive passenger car. No, I'm sure 3/4 of the people listening to this podcast are driving four-wheel drive cars. Dates right back to that.
And we, of course, learn that we all know that it was dominant for rally, especially Group B, and that we associate it with that. But they were also doing this type of motorsport for circuit racing as well. So they initially started in Trans Am in 1988 with the 200, and I've talked about this before. But in the U.S., they got Walter Roll, who was there, of course, one of their star rally drivers, and then Hans Stuck and Hurley Haywood to drive at various times either 2 or 3 of these Audi 200, the big sedan cars with a 2.2-liter turbocharged 5-cylinder, against guys in Corvettes and Mustangs and Cougars and Nissan Zs, big high horsepower front engine rear wheel drive sports cars against a large sedan with 2.2 liters, and everyone was like, "You guys are freaking insane." And then in 1988, Audi was winning so much stuff that halfway through the season they handicapped them. They put intake restrictors on them and made them carry ballast and put smaller tires on, and Audi still continued to dominate. And so they were banned after 1988. So then they took the same technology and put it in a smaller car, the Audi 90, and went to GTO, which is the next step up from Trans Am. The first car was actually kind of shit, and then they went back and in 9 weeks completely re-engineered the entire car, but they'd missed enough of the season that even though they came back and dominated everything, they didn't win the championship because they had spent 9 weeks redoing the whole car. Right. But after that four-wheel drive was outlawed from there as well. And so then they turned all that energy and the team, this is also with Hans Stuck driving, and I forget who the other, maybe it was Frank Biele was the other driver, to DTM. And then they started running the big sedan, the S-Class size sedan with a V8 in it, the V8 Quattro, in DTM, and they won that in, I think it was 90 and 91. So it's the same group of Audi Motorsport guys who are in the U.S. And the reason why they are in the U.S. is because of the whole unintended acceleration thing that happened, the whole 60 minutes, which turned out to be false thing. That
it wasn't actually
marketing.
False. Yeah, the 60 minutes thing was false. So if for those who don't know, Audi's cars were accused of killing people. That they would just take off. Drivers wouldn't do anything, and the car would slam on its gas like it was possessed. Mm-hmm. And of course, Piëch's engineering response to that is not even remotely possible. Shut the fuck up, which was not the correct thing to say, even though it was true.
Press.
It turned out the issue was that the gas pedal was offset so far to the left. We'll never know for sure, but it certainly appears it was the case. The car didn't do it. It was driver error. And it appears that the reason why Audis had a tendency towards quote unintended acceleration more than most is because of where the transmission was. The pedals were offset to the left, and directly under the steering column was the gas pedal. Everything else was offset to the left. And so that was the reason. If you have an automatic now and it has an interlock where you have to put your foot on the brake to take it out of park, that was one of the concessions that came out of that, and one of the rules that came out of that was you had to make sure your foot was on the right pedal to get out of park, and it did almost genuinely kill.
Yeah, Audi sales absolutely cratered in the U.S., and so they were looking for basically positive PR.
They were literal days. Yeah. Like 2 days. There was a scheduled, we're closing Audi of North America. I think it was 2 days. I spoke to people who were there.
Really?
They were packed. It was done. It was over. And then at the last second, they changed their mind. But it was that close that Audi almost didn't exist today because of that.
In the U.S.
Scandal.
Yeah, so that was, motorsport was aimed at sort of improving Audi's image, to remake Audi's image in the public eye in a much more favorable light. And
you don't have unintended acceleration claims in racing.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing is this is the genesis of one of the greatest tuning companies of all time, which is for Audis, which is called Intended Acceleration. There was a tuning company called Intended Acceleration.
Hashtag too soon. Okay.
So this is now, So
Quattro comes out, shits on the entire world of motorsport.
Motorsport and production cars as well. And so BMW responds, and so does Mercedes with all-wheel drive equivalent models like the BMW 325iX, and the Mercedes 4MATIC system appears. And there was a four-wheel drive version of the E34 also. So everybody is sort of scrambling to respond. And it starts, of course, with the Germans. And this is before any sort of other Japanese, I guess, also responded to some extent, although not in the premium space.
Not in the premium space. They weren't there yet.
That's correct.
And it took the Japanese a long time to respond in the premium space years later. I mean, I think Lexus, Infiniti, and Acura debuted without all-wheel drive.
Yeah, and probably were that way for at least for the first 10 years,
if
not longer.
Oh, yeah.
And so then 1989, the next technical frontier for Piëch at Audi appears, which is TDI.
Right. And diesel was his baby. Diesel was his solution to the fuel economy problem that was never going to be able to be solved with the Wankel. So it was, his strategy was Audi will win not through Wankel, but through diesels and 5-cylinders. And so 89 is when the technological breakthrough happened that really allowed diesels to become widespread, and that was TDI.
So this is computer controlled rather than entirely mechanically controlled.
Were they?
With direct injection, I believe so. Yeah.
No, those Pompadours were still mechanical fuel pumps.
Really?
But the difference was there were individual pumps on each cylinder, right? Isn't that how Pompadours worked? Yeah. Each injector was its own pump. But it was direct injection. So rather than just a pre-chamber or some indirect injection, port injection, as we call it for a gas engine, it was direct, and that allowed much, much better control over the combustion event. And they were loud, but they did the trick.
Yeah, so Audis start appearing with this technology, and now we are into the early 90s.
Well, yeah, within 10 years, I think it was within about 10 years of TDI debuting, half of all the cars sold in Europe were diesels. I mean, we all think of diesels in America as a side note. They were a footnote. They were sort of couple percent. I think it probably peaked at 3% of passenger car sales.
Were diesels peripheral in the 80s for European market cars? I feel like diesels were available there.
They were there, but I think they were more popular here in the U.S. because of Mercedes. Yes. So the Mercedes.
No, but were there diesels around in the 80s in Europe?
Oh yeah, but there was no real reason to have them, because don't forget, we got the Mercedes
economy
stuff. Ish, yeah. Economy was a thing, but they, when you're talking about a 1.0 liter gas engine versus a 1.6 liter diesel, which you needed to move at the same speed, the economy difference wasn't that great. We had great, big, enormous engines here, but Mercedes and Volkswagen brought those diesels here. I mean, I can't think of anything else that was really sold as a diesel successfully. Right, GM tried to make a
that
V8.
Was an unmitigated disaster because it was a gas engine that was converted, and they didn't strengthen the head bolts or anything else.
Exactly, it doesn't work in that direction. But Mercedes brought those diesels here as a response to corporate annual fuel economy, which was the U.S. fuel economy standards that wouldn't have ever existed if it was. Mercedes would have never brought diesels here, I don't think.
Yeah, it was a Band-Aid solution for them to meet the CAFE standards of corporate average fuel economies.
Which they didn't have in Europe. So it wasn't really until TDI that you saw.
I think it was sort of a price of fuel. I mean, certainly Mercedes was producing diesels for European consumption in a wide scale during this time. I mean, most marques did. Volvo, Citroën had diesels. Peugeot had diesels. Yeah. There was always a diesel option if you were really a penny pincher.
Yeah.
Basically.
Right, I think that's what it was. But it wasn't like in the U.S. where 92 or 94% of Mercedes sold in the early 80s were diesels here.
Yeah,
that was
I imagine that was almost a corporate decision of what to send to the U.S. in order to ensure that they met the fuel economy standards rather than by customer demand.
I'm sure customers would have demanded 5.6 liter V8s, which is what they got later on once Mercedes had figured out. Had figured out how to master the CAFE. Thing, but by the late 90s, more than half the cars, and more importantly, not just half the cars overall, 70% of Audis sold were diesel. Right, we had vastly more than half, and in some markets like France, 70-something% of overall cars were diesel. This was huge. Yeah. This defined the automotive landscape. We can't forget that being here in America, where they were a footnote.
So it was immensely successful, feather in his cap at his time at Audi to have that. And as I think you mentioned in the last episode, positioned him for a new job. Yeah,
which was chairman of the entire Volkswagen Group.
Yes.
Which he
became CEO of Audi in 1988. And then by 1993, he's not just CEO of Audi, he's CEO of the entire VW group.
Yeah, and he inherited a shit show.
He did, and I think he was quoted as saying, had it not been such a shit show, this is paraphrasing, this is not how he said it.
In normal times, someone like me would have never gotten a chance.
Yes, exactly.
Normal, calmer time.
Yes.
Yeah, he was a disruptor. Everyone knew he was a disruptor, but he got shit done.
Yes.
And Volkswagen was, according to all this stuff that I saw in German, the German reports, 2 to 3 months away from bankruptcy.
Right.
They were going to shutter the doors again. Here we are back in the repeat of the 1970s, where Volkswagen was genuinely about to go out of business, and he was their last ditch savior to do that. Pretty big job.
And I think he turned a profit within 2 years.
Yeah, which is kind of ironic because when you sort of look back at the arc of his career, what set him up for what the things that made him so successful was his focus on product, and his lack of focus on shareholder value actually almost put Volkswagen out of business later on, a couple years later. Because he wasn't focused on share prices. So Volkswagen genuinely almost got bought by Porsche.
This is 2008.
Yeah.
2008, the share price was so depressed that there was, and that combined with the fact that Porsche was making so much fucking money on Cayennes meant that Porsche had a shitload of cash, Volkswagen was super cheap, and Porsche just started buying ever increasing sizes of
which
pieces.
is such an amazing David versus Goliath thing, because don't forget, Piëch's mother's maiden name is Porsche. He has interest in Porsche being successful. He was part of the team that put in Wendel and Wiedeking, who was the cost cutter, who turned Porsche around from bankruptcy. Right. So he at least deserves partial credit.
At the exact same time, Porsche almost goes out of business because they are selling so few cars. They sold 3,800 cars in North America in 93 versus 31,000 in 1986. So 31,000 to 3,800 between 86 and 93 in the US.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was happening was they were having a lot of production issues at Porsche because they were building the cars in an old-fashioned way. And I think I'm sure we have talked about this, but they hired the Japanese consultants, Shingijutsu, who had developed a Toyota production system of sort of all of this optimized manufacturing and just in time and reducing errors. So Porsche's had a combination of a lot of rework being necessary, which is the car reaches the end of the line. They're like, oh, this is fucked. It needs to be fixed. And so the number of hours to build a car was much higher than it should be. I think that they, through the course of this Japanese consulting, just not by changing any components of the car, but just the way that they were built, I think they reduced the number of hours to build the car from like 90 hours to 60 hours or something absurd like that. That's like huge, it was just an asinine change. The other thing they really focused on was inventory management. You know, Porsche had all these legacy relationships with suppliers they'd been using since probably in some cases the 1950s. And they would just make a batch of shit and send it to a warehouse at Porsche and then send an invoice and Porsche would pay it. And then they have 6 months of stuff sitting around on the shelf. And then some guy has to go find it on a shelf somewhere when he's on the production line. The car is moving down the line and he can't find whatever the heck he's looking for. I mean, just these sort of basic inefficiencies. And so the Japanese came in and fixed that, and Wendel and Wiedeking was the chief executive installed by Piëch and I'm sure others.
Yeah, I don't think Piëch was directly involved in the installing of him, but he, as a shareholder in a Porsche, he was involved in choosing him, and he also Piëch was a student of Japanese manufacturing processes, including Kaizen, which is, continual improvement, this whole idea.
He had always admired Japanese objects, and so he was known even in the, I think, 60s or 70s for riding Japanese motorcycles, because the Japanese, as car people, we don't know this, but in the late 60s and early 70s, the Japanese really upended the performance motorcycle world because it was being run by a bunch of sort of cottage British and Italian manufacturers. The world's preeminent motorcycle, it might have been like a Norton Commando or something like that, and Honda arrives in 1967 with the CB750. Anyway, so Piëch admires the way the Japanese sort of rationalize a superior product onto the market at a better price that's higher quality, and he was an admirer since, I'm sure because of that, since the 60s, of Japanese products and manufacturing style. So the turnaround happens at Porsche
and Volkswagen.
Right.
So Volkswagen comes in. Mark III is just out. Volkswagen is losing a ton of money on the cars. They refine the production processes on that, and that's where he really starts the platform sharing stuff. So VW, a lot of people think of BMW as this BMW and as this like platform sharing company, which it had done for years. But VW had been doing the matrix, I guess the matrix theory of car building, where you have one set of components for width and one in length. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, the Mark I early on had, let me go back, Type 1. I mean, I think
this
of the original
modular,
the Beetle versus Carmen Ghia versus Bus versus Type 4,
411.
right? Which were all sort of the same components and stretched in different dimensions. Volkswagen continued to do that. What Piëch did was sort of take all of the brands under the umbrella and use that same type of platform and part sharing strategy across brands. So one of his first things to do was take Passat, which was a large car a larger car than an A4, and make it based on the A4. So engineer it once for the higher level, where most people will badge engineer by say like, okay, I'm going to make this little widget, it's a piece of shit, and I'm going to put sparkles on it and sell it as a more expensive version. His strategy was the opposite. Let's engineer this new Audi A4, and it's going to be amazing as an Audi A4, but then also bring it down a notch as a Volkswagen, and it's going to be a mind-blowing Volkswagen for these people.
Yeah.
But we'll differentiate it by making it longer. So you get a bigger car for cheaper as the Passat, and you get a smaller, more premium car for an Audi. And oh my God,
and so this is the
work.
B5.
B5.
This is the B5 Passat and Audi A4. That's why they share the same chassis designation.
Yeah, same car. Genius move. You have a series of engines that VW was always good about this, using different engines, mostly engineered by Audi across both lineups. But you had this 1.8 liter turbo, which was a new sort of 5-valve per cylinder high-tech turbo done under Piëch's watch at Audi. And of course the VR6, which I don't think Piëch had anything to do with. I think that was done while he was over at Audi. But an ingenious compact layout, again, putting 6 where 4.5 would normally fit. Right. Always managing to cram the most number of cylinders into the smallest space possible.
Yeah, and this was sort of an obsession during this era, and that's why you see the proliferation of W layouts also. So there's of course, the W8, which was used exclusively in the Passat,
and that B5 Passat,
yeah, and then
which is amazing because I think it has 4 balance shafts.
Yeah,
it's the only 8-cylinder I know of that has.
I've
balance
heard
shafts.
They're just miserable to live with and maintain, and
but they
own.
sound so good.
Great. But it's also 270 horsepower from 3.6 liters. I forget, something like that. Or maybe they're 4 liters. Anyway, so so you have the W8, and then it's confusingly Audi also has their 60 valve V8, which is 4.2 liters at the same time, and then there's a diesel V8 at the same time.
Okay, so it's confusing because the Audi V8 with 5 valves per cylinder was 2 1.8 turbos.
Yes.
Right, the way the car companies always do this is they engineer one combustion chamber, and then just hit Control C, Control V, and as many they need. So they had the V series of engines, which were based on the 4s, but then they have the VR6, and then they had the W series, which were based on the VR6s. So you had a W8, which was a VR4.
Yes.
There was a VR5 that always everyone outside of the US forgets about. Then there was the W8, which is 2 VR4s. Then there is the W12, which is 2 VR6s. The W16, the Bugatti Veyron motor, which is 2 VR8s. But there
W8s.
was W8s. No. I mean, technically 2 VR8s or 2 W8s. Yes, 2 W8s end-to-end, which are 2 4 WR4s. Anyway, 4 VR4s. There was one VR10. W10. Excuse me.
Oh, yes, and it recently surfaced installed in an E39 M5.
Yes.
That's right.
I want to hear a W10 so bad.
And so then there was also the V10 diesel,
which was gear driven. It has
we should go back to empire building, and then we can talk about engine proliferation, because I once you assemble all the pieces of the empire, then you get this amazing.
Well, I mean, we can get there in a second, but you just mentioned that V10. You know that V10 TDI had no timing chain.
Gear.
And no timing belt. It was gears. But also everything else was gear driven too. The alternator, the water pump, no belts for racing, for Dakar. But also there was a 5-cylinder, which is straight 5 diesel that was with also gear driven. That was half of that engine. So the pattern that you're seeing is that you take one layout and you extract as many variants as you possibly can from it. Which
However, what you end up with at this point, you could also get the twin-charge 3-cylinder during this period as well.
They had a twin-charge 3-cylinder?
There was a twin-charge.
There was a twin-charge 1.4 liter 4-cylinder. That was originally called TSI, which is
so what you end up with is that, through the proliferation of brands, and basically Piech built an empire in the 90s and into the 2000s. And so Lamborghini joins the fold in 98, Bentley around the same time after the Vickers Group goes away, and then Bugatti joins around that same time. There's a Seat, which I think is maybe earlier in the 90s, and Skoda around that time too. And what Skoda usually does is it's a budget car that is maybe one generation behind the Volkswagens, which is still perfectly adequate for these more emerging Eastern European markets. Seat is Spanish specific, and so they're segmenting the market, but also platform and technology sharing between the Volkswagens and the Seats and the Skodas, and then you have Audi being premium, and you have Lamborghini being more premium and sporting, and then you have Bugatti being even more premium and
most
faster.
Premium. Yeah.
And so at some point in the early 2000s, you have this sort of, you can fill out a questionnaire, which is like, how many cylinders would you like? And then you could put any number you want. And then you could say, how would you like them arranged? Then you could put any shape you want. I would like them in a W, and then, or a V, or
flat.
A straight or flat. And then you say, what fuel would you like? So it's really just like this a la carte system. But I mean, by happenstance almost, because there's a V10 gas, there's a V10 diesel, there's apparently a W10, there's a VR, there's a W8, there's a V8 gas, there's a V8 diesel, there's 5 cylinders in a straight line or in a W.
I mean, it did get a little bit messy.
Yeah, it gets very complicated. I mean, it's a little bit gnarly. But
and at one point
all the way
there
up to
was
16. V12 TDI also was available in the Q7.
And at the same time, there were multiple. Later on, there were also multiple versions of the same size engine. It was a 4-liter Porsche V8, 4-liter Audi V8, but that's kind of a little bit later. But what he did was say, I'm going to own the entire automotive universe from Skoda through Seat, through Volkswagen, through Audi, through Porsche.
In the same way that you could say, what engine do you want with how many cylinders arranged how, with what fuel? You can also say, what country are you in? How much money do you want to spend? What is your lot in life? Are you a sort of pedestrian, non-sporting oriented person, or are you a bazillionaire with maximum velocity in mind? And there's an answer for you.
All of it.
For no matter what.
Which is pretty amazing to do that. And
it's a true empire. And I'm not sure that this has... what is the closest anyone else has ever come to this?
I mean, it would have to be the GM empire in the 1940s and 50s, where you had Chevy, Buick, Oldsmobile, Pontiac, GM. You had everything from Cadillac, which was really kind of at the top of the market, Chevy, which was at the bottom of the market. When we just look at just the U.S. market.
I would say sporting intent was not really represented.
Corvette, I guess later.
1952.
I don't think we've ever seen
just.
The best part about
no one, I think, has really ever come close.
No, and I think the reason why that should be hugely successful is because in an economic downturn, the cheaper brands are going to do well, better comparatively to the ultra premium ones, and maybe
except for the ultra premiums
Bugatti's going to be unaffected, right? Because rich people don't give a shit. But it's an amazing amount of brands and technology that he had amassed,
and they're not like garbage brands either. They're all kind of good brands.
The reason why why nobody else succeeded at Bugatti and no one else was ever able to succeed at Bentley. Bentley never made a profit in 70 years, right? Is that he took platform sharing that everyone else did and he flipped it upside down. Rather than making a shit Chevy Cavalier and putting a shitty, embarrassing Cadillac Cimarron badge on it, he engineered for the top.
Yeah, so the Phaeton was emerged
how
from
the Veyron
Continental.
used the same key as the Phaeton. I mean, I did this in the video, but the Phaeton used the same key as a Golf. Right. And a Bugatti and a Bentley and everything else. Just, okay, it's a component. If I can only make one of these components versus I have to have a selection of 40 of them, I can make it a really good product and use economy of scales to bring down that price.
Rather than to design it cheaply and then produce it also cheaply.
And the benefit of that was very, very apparent when we went from Mark III Golf to Mark IV Golf, because 3 was a kind of pile of shit. And 4 was a better car than a Mercedes-Benz. And I think that's when the world started to take him really seriously.
Yeah, and he was obsessed with quality. I mean, he's famous for like an obsession with panel gaps because it required better engineering tolerances, which just leads to better products overall. Right. And, they would share mirror motors and window switches and stuff where if you made one that was good enough for, There's nothing special about a mirror motor. If it works in a Veyron, it certainly will work in anything else.
Well, right. So long as it works well enough. And the point that he made was you will always notice a bad part in a car. You know, if I hit the window switch in my insert name of a premium car, my Audi, and the window motor goes and makes terrible noises and goes down crooked and fucked up, I'll notice. However, so that car needs a higher quality motor, but no one's ever going to complain about having a really quiet, silent window motor in a Golf.
Yes.
It's just going to suddenly be a good car. And if you're only stocking that one part and you can take advantage of the economy of scales, actually the car will be cheaper.
As long as there's no issue with the part in question.
And that bites everyone. Look at Takata, right? Yeah. I mean, Takata's airbags wound up in everyone's cars. They were killing people, and now trillions of cars are recalled. I don't even know what the number is. But like, okay, so let's get to his mistakes, right? The biggest mistake I think he made early on was Rolls-Royce. He fucked up big. And so he thought he was buying Rolls-Royce and Bentley. And this is a rare kind of a executive outmaneuvering thing. He's a product guy, right? Not an executive. So
he is a good executive because he's a good product guy, not because he's a good politiker.
Well, he was a bad executive we'll get to the Porsche thing, right? Is the perfect example. Yeah. He didn't give a shit about shareholder value. I think he refused to give quarterly reports. I mean, like he just quarterly stock reporty things. Who cares? Cars have a life cycle of 10 years. Who cares about one quarter, right? It takes 10 years to affect change at a car company. Leave me alone. And there were definite drawbacks to doing that. And he almost lost. He actually said that typically it's the first generation who makes the wealth, the second who enjoys it, and the third who destroys it.
Yes.
And he was like, we came really close to destroying it, and with the Porsche thing. So like we said, Porsche's shareholder value was high because of Vita King, because Porsche was so profitable. VW's shareholder value was zero because he refused to give reports and didn't do the things that would result in stock price.
I think was like 40 euros or something absurdly low.
Porsche started to just get chunk after chunk after chunk after chunk.
Well, and they were also leveraging heavily.
And then we're shorting it and doing all kinds of other weird shit. And the final decision, like it came down to the wire where everyone called whatever the hell happened, whatever moves wound up happening, it was going to be both companies out of business. So he had to then turn around as Volkswagen and buy Porsche and save Porsche. And ultimately that ironically wound up giving him control over Porsche as the chairman of Volkswagen Group. So inadvertently he wound up controlling Porsche again, which I think was to everyone's benefit because all brands profit under a management of people who care about cars.
There was sometimes also concern about conflict of interest. I mean, for example, Porsche got a kind of a sweetheart. So the Cayenne and the Touareg. The Cayenne is the car that propelled Porsche to the financial position that allowed them to even be contenders for buying Volkswagen because of all the profits that vehicle generated. Yeah. And they basically got kind of a sweetheart deal from Volkswagen, who supplied a lot of the underpinnings and chassis for those cars because they're shared with the Touareg. And so Porsche made a lot more money on those cars than Volkswagen did because Volkswagen sold them to Porsche fairly cheaply, and Porsche had really high profit margins because you could put a turbo on it and sell it for 100,000 euros instead of being in a comparatively more competitive price point space where the Touareg was existing. And so, you have to question, of course, the Piëch family owns a portion of Porsche through all of this period. And you're like, interesting. It's an interesting way to sort of almost privatize or take over Volkswagen, which was a publicly held company via the vehicle that was
That's why I said
Porsche. I mean,
bad executive. He wasn't really working in the best interest of Volkswagen. Right, absolutely.
Yes, he was actually positioning it, and it's impossible to say precisely how intentionally this was for takeover by an entity in which he held a great deal
And let's
of
not forget
interest.
this almost happened once before. I mean, the fights between Volkswagen and Porsche had been going on since the 1970s. The perfect example, 914, they were all killing each other over.
Yeah, and the 924.
924 was another failed joint effort where Porsche and Volkswagen were guaranteeing each other favors that fell apart because someone died. I don't remember the story at this point, but it's not good when you have family members who have a managerial position and a fiduciary duty over at one company, but actually
and also
profit
a very strong interest in another.
in it. Right, exactly. That
And
is tangential relation.
commercially engaged with one another.
But anyway, Rolls-Royce, he thought he was buying Rolls-Royce, and he bought the name Rolls-Royce, but not the ability to put that name on a car ever. And so he wound up with Volkswagen, wound up with Bentley only, and then wound up with useless rights to the name Rolls-Royce, but nothing to do with it. And he was outmaneuvered by Bernd Piëchisode, who was the chairman of BMW at the time. And so what does he do?
Hires him
as his successor.
Which was very convenient for Piëchisode because he was unceremoniously booted out the door because he had overseen BMW Group's purchase of Rover in 1993, which was just a colossal, catastrophic, just clusterfuck.
Yeah.
I mean, Rover Group was permanently axed in 2005, but it cost BMW a massive amount of money. I mean, it was absolutely just a complete and utter debacle.
I don't think he realized how messed up Rover was as an organization. But
yes,
the idea,
but then after they bought them, they sort of didn't really manage them closely. They said, let them do their continued thing. They seem to be doing fine. Yeah. We'll just let them do it. And what Rover really needed was a lot of it needed a training montage, like in a movie where it's like some fat, overweight, whatever, and then it gets whipped into shape by BMW, which is what Rover Group really needed because it was really the detritus of British Leyland, which was the detritus of BMC and British Motor Holdings. Look at the difference in what happened.
Continue. Well, look at the difference between what happened to Range Rover, where BMW came in and made a new product.
Well, yeah, and that
versus
was
Rover.
What BMW really got out of that whole thing was they did a good job of Land Rover, although then they subsequently sold that on to Ford, and then got Mini out of it. And they sort of basically raped and pillaged the Rover Group and took those two key things out of it, and then the rest of it.
The idea behind the purchase of Rover as a car company was really smart. They were looking at...
They had known what they were buying.
Well, yeah, but had they just gone on and done it. So the idea, Piëchisode's idea was... BMW needed to make front-wheel drive cars for space efficiency and fuel economy, and
they could expand down market in the same way that
that Mini allowed them to without the price.
Or that VW Group or Audi had VW to go down. I mean, it's the opposite.
Yeah, exactly.
But they wanted to be maneuvering for the same kind of dynamic where they could access the masses.
Right, and the idea there is Rover could be a front-wheel drive car. So the Rover 75 was partially engineered by BMW and to BMW standards, that Rover. And the idea this was going to be the front-wheel drive competitor to the 3 Series, and from that point move down market. That was really smart. It didn't work.
The execution.
It didn't. The car didn't work. It was styled wrong. The Germans do not understand British charm. That everything is a sort of caricature of it, and somehow it's working for Bentley, even though I don't particularly agree with a lot of the choices that they make.
I thought the L322 did a very good job.
That was fantastic. That car is amazing. Yeah. But anyway, so Piëchisode outmaneuvers Piëch in that deal, and Piëch is smart enough and has the
he has met his match, and so he is interested.
But what sort of egomaniacal lunatic monster would then say, "You've outmaneuvered me. Here, let me name you as my successor." That's pretty amazing.
Yes.
Although
Piëchisode also gummed it all up at Volkswagen too in later years.
He wound up getting ousted. I don't even remember what the hell happened.
Neither do I.
Winterkorn wound up taking over. So
yeah.
So all right, let's go back for a second. So before we get to the Winterkorn chapter, let's talk about Veyron. So
we should talk about Phaeton and Veyron both, because I think the philosophy that underpins them is very similar, which is that, and it also underpins the XL1. This is very Piëchian when he is now in sort of total control and has the empire, which is that he gives engineers these absurd, insane, impossible to reach targets. The one that is famous for the Phaeton is that it had to be able to maintain the interior at 20 degrees Celsius at maximum speed and ambient temperature of 50 degrees Celsius, which is like 140 degrees or something absurd like that, while going 300 kilometers an hour with 4 people on board or something like that.
Without a draft.
Yeah.
Because, moving air will kill you, according to the Germans. Famously half of the engineering staff walked out when he gave that. Mm-hmm. The mandate for the Veyron was 407 kilometers an hour, which is such an arbitrary speed until you really start to understand the psyche of this man. The fastest production car in the world was a McLaren F1. Mm-hmm. McLaren F1 did 217 or something, whatever, at its limiter, and then they went back and this is where I don't approve of the number that is the generally accepted number of the
241.
241, because that was bullshit.
They raised the rev limiter.
Right, which is
I think it was 230 something without the rev limiter raised, and it was 241 when they raised the limit.
Okay, you don't get to raise the rev limiter on your special car and then call it a production car world record. I'm sorry, that's bullshit. So he only had to beat 230, whatever it was, from the McLaren F1, and he fucking decimated it by 20 miles an hour to get to 407 kilometers an hour. Now, anyone in marketing would have said, just get to 400. But the target wasn't 400, and they accidentally hit 407. The target was 407 because 407 kilometers an hour is the fastest speed ever measured at Le Mans. And remember that he won Le Mans twice and got fired because his mom was a Porsche.
Right, and the car that did that, of course, so in 1988 or 89, Peugeot specifically built a car to set the record for the fastest car ever at Le Mans, and went 407 kilometers per hour. And so that was
with a turbocharged PRV engine. It's a goddamn miracle. It's a Christmas miracle in May or whenever it was. It's unbelievable.
Right, and that car took the record from the Porsche 917, which is Piëch's project at Porsche.
Yeah.
And so, now we are in the 2000s, and so that is the top speed of the Veyron. And, to do it in a street car with functioning air conditioning, you could freaking do that in flip-flops if you wanted to, as opposed to a Nomex suit, by a professional. It's just anyone could, with the car, could hypothetically do that.
It's one of the minutiae that I love most about the Veyron, because it's such a specific fuck you to Peugeot. Right? Like, you took my baby. Everyone took my baby from me. Like, I did the 917. I was winning. I was doing great. They took my baby from me. I wasn't allowed to work for Porsche anymore. Now I'm going to shit on you by matching the speed with a road car that does it. I love that.
Yeah. And everyone, by the way, it's 30 years later.
Yeah. And he still was holding that grudge. Yeah. I love it. I mean, you go to Bugatti's media site and it talks about 407 kilometers an hour being the target. And no one thinks to ask why the fuck 407. Like, I love that. But anyway, so the targets for Veyron was get the record back that had been taken from him in his 917. The achievements necessary for Phaeton were just absurd. Yeah. 43,000 Newton meters per degree of torsional rigidity, which is something that no car had ever seen before and was only ever beaten by the Veyron for 10 years after that.
With a carbon fiber monocoque.
Well, and a tiny little one, right? It's very simple to make a small, rigid structure. When you elongate it into a sedan,
limousine.
Yeah, I mean, it probably doubled the structural rigidity of a Mercedes S-Class. So he did this ridiculous targets. And then, of course, the XL1, which was 1 liter of fuel per 100 kilometers. He hit the targets, all of the targets on the Veyron. I think they hit all of the targets on the Phaeton, except for sales, right? No one bought sales. But I wrote this in the script.
But that was like sort of a vanity project, and that's one of his missteps. And you start to see that as he gets the empire together, he now is in such a position of dominance and sort of security with Volkswagen, which is the volume maker, that he sort of starts to get engaged in these sort of random vanity projects, which are not objectively profitable, but just sort of demonstrate complete dominance. And I think the Phaeton is one of those projects, and I think that the Veyron is also, because they, of course, famously lose all this money on the Veyron.
I don't know if I agree with you. Firstly, because I think they lost money on the Veyron overall on each individual car at the beginning, but the beginning that was €1 million. At the end it was 3.5, 4. That I doubt very much they were losing much money at that point, right? So when you look at the whole Veyron project as a whole, I wonder if it really did lose all that much money. Number 2, what is the marketing benefit that...
Well, yes, and that's the type of system boundary drawing that you can do if you are an executive of the entire empire.
Exactly.
And not because what would traditionally an empire of car makers would do in this situation is they would assign a CEO of one particular mark and say, look, you have your own P&L, your own profit and loss, and you have to run this as a standalone business, and it has to make money. When Piech has sort of dominance over the entire empire, he doesn't have to work in those constraints and report, profit numbers to some board who is overseeing him in the same way that he doesn't care about stock prices. And so I don't know, you could say enables or frees or allows, depending on what connotation you want to put on it, him to sort of do whatever he wants and say, well, the system boundary is larger than just Bugatti because it's the entire VW group.
Right. As long as, excuse me, as long as, Porsche's still shitting out Cayennes at a $30,000 profit margin each, we're good. I think later on, each one of the divisions or the brands did have to operate profitably, but I don't think Bugatti ever really made a profit, but I do think it was a worthwhile endeavor in the same way that I think Phaeton was. Because if you look at Phaeton overall, of course it was a failure. No, the idea of a $60,000, $70,000, $80,000 Volkswagen on its face is absurd. And then you go and deal with a friggin' Volkswagen dealership, for example, in this country, and they're used to selling $20,000 Jettas to people and being assholes to them. So imagine what they're doing to the $100,000 customer. Like, it just was never going to work on the face of it. But that car wasn't just the Phaeton.
No,
that car was
the
a Bentley Continental, and
that thing lasted forever.
20 years. And so the joke is it was a $60,000 Volkswagen that was overpriced, but all they had to do
a $200,000 Bentley, deeply discounted.
Exactly. And it was engineered to be good enough to be a Bentley. And if that car was good enough to be a Bentley for 20 years, and it started out $180,000,
Bentley's standards for cars were not the highest.
Yeah, but that car was
innovation. But
right,
I think the car,
prior to the Conti, you mean?
Yeah, and the Continental became sort of a world-class car that you could, transition away from these tweed-wearing people who are like, I tolerate its miscellaneous bullshittery because it's a Bentley.
Right.
To like Paris Hilton. Regular old rich people can just get in the car and use it, and it works because it's a VW.
Because it's a Volkswagen, exactly, or an Audi, yeah. And so I don't know if I consider either the Phaeton or the...
but was it truly necessary to make the Phaeton in order to make the Continental that good?
No. And there's an argument to be said that it should have been an Audi, and of course it was. There was the aluminum version of it. But Audi always had a special carve out. Like, that as much as his mom's maiden name was Porsche, Audi was his baby. And
yes,
so like
he built Audi into the company that it was.
Audi got control over Lamborghini. It should have never been that way. Audi is always out of touch with its own importance. Audi was hugely important for the company because of profitability, right? But Audi should have never been able to stop the Lamborghini Estoque from happening, but they did, which was the sedan. They said, we can't have an Estoque because it's going to cannibalize sales of the A8, all 6 sales. It was stupid. But Audi always gets special treatment. Audi should have never had an R8. What the fuck did that have anything to do with an Audi? Right? Was it beautiful? Yes. Did it drive okay? All right, because Audi tuned it. It wasn't great. An amazing engine, and it was beautiful, and it was well constructed, and it had Quattro-ish all-wheel drive. But Audi always got special treatment, always, because it was his baby, and that was where
his favorite child.
And Porsche got a little bit of special treatment too. Some, I would say, deservedly, but because it was really making his family and himself even more rich. But the one blunder that I think you want to talk about,
money he was not super motivated by.
He was so loaded he didn't give a shit. I mean, he threatened to quit so many times in his career where he just said it's him or me, and they had no choice. Right? He could do that. He could just say sorry. I think it was when he got the chairman position. They had announced somebody else, and he just crossed his arms and was like, "No, it's my time." And they were like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" I was like, "Get out! It's him or me." And they gave him the chairmanship.
This was how he came to power at Volkswagen?
I think that was the veto. It was one of them. It was either the Audi full chairman. I think it might have been the Audi chairman in '89. One of the 2 times. I know there were 2 times in his life where he said it's him or me. But one of them, they had like literally already given the job to somebody else. And they made him wait. I think it was both.
He was going to wait a year.
They had to wait a year.
If the other guy fucked it up, then they gave it to him.
But I think the Volkswagen chairmanship was him saying, it's my time. Like, the company's about to go out. You either give it to me or I'm fucking out. And they had no choice. They were going out of bankrupt. They were going out of business and going to be bankrupt anyway. But he was so rich, who cared?
Yeah.
It's not like he was not going to be able to feed his 13 children and 6 baby mamas. But yeah, the big fuck up that you're talking about is Dieselgate. And so perhaps I've gotten a little bit fond of Dr. Piëch. By the way, he wasn't a doctor. That was an honorary title.
No,
it
it's
was just given to him.
German fashion, like Porsche.
No, well, some of them have a doctor in engineering or doctor. He didn't. That was an honorary doctorate that was given to him, so it was given the title. But when I look back, I see a huge career of real wins. There's never any marketing bullshit. There was never any marketing bluster. Like it was just
let the product
speak for itself. And so I've gotten pushback from people while I'm doing research talking about, oh yeah, but he was responsible for Dieselgate. Hence the clean diesel, haha, with the funny little tongue emoji. I have a hard time aligning everything that I saw that I've learned that man did in his career with the idea that he would accept anything less. So anything less than a true engineering solution. So for example, the XL1 was actually a failure. So the XL1 was he drove the 1L. So there were three different cars in this, the Revelations episode that I sort of covered, and I don't think I did the best job in the world at explaining. There was the 1L, which is the 1 liter concept car, which was a tandem 2-seat car that he drove to his last ever, I didn't put this in the video, last ever board meeting.
Right, and I think it was Piëch's reader in the back.
Yeah,
and he drove them together to the meeting where they would hand over control to Piëch's
you talk
reader.
about like a fucking dramatic, exit.
Yeah.
But that was what he did. The idea of that car was 1 liter per 100. It did 0.9 liters. But then when they got that car ready for production, it couldn't hit 0.9. It couldn't hit 1.0, which was the mark, right? It hit 1.4 liter, 1.38, I think it was, liters per 100, which is a failure. Like the car didn't work. And they had made it a hybrid by that point. So they made the engine a lot. It went from 300 to 800 cc, and it was now a hybrid, and it still couldn't hit the 1 liter mark. And that's one of those rare Piëch failures. Like you just didn't see him say, I'm going to do this, and then not be able to do it.
Yeah.
And
he always would point the bat, and then he'd hit the home run
right?
that spot.
And it was when the L1 became the XL1. So it was 1L to L1 to XL1. And XL1 is when they sort of took a lesson. I believe that it was probably a lesson from Chevy with the Volt, where they had said, well, the car gets about 238 miles per gallon. It uses about a liter of 100 if you plug it in first. And it was the idea of this plug-in hybrid expanded over time would use a liter of fuel every 100 kilometers on average. So they made it a plug-in hybrid, which then allowed them to widen the frontal area, make it a normal size car, and then hit that 1 liter target. And it really did. It was 21 grams per kilometer, 0.9 liters per 100. That happened. I never saw any bullshit from Volkswagen saying this is a 1 liter car that just uses 1.38. Right? This was the Mark IV is going to be better than a Mercedes, except it's not. Like it was all real.
Yes,
everything was real. Dieselgate was a bunch of engineers at Volkswagen Group in the U.S. Frankly, making a bunch of technological advances that didn't work. Right? There was a mandate that Volkswagen would sell diesels in the US, and this was going to be Volkswagen's chance to finally compete with the Toyotas and the Japanese car companies of the world and their shitty little hybrids, and we're going to do it with diesel.
But Volkswagen, I think it's critical to note that Dieselgate happened in the United States. Volkswagen had a decades-long history of completely misapprehending the American market and how to appeal there. They accidentally achieved success with the Beetle as a counterculture icon, and I think their maximum sales were like 1970 with like close to 600,000 cars, and they never ever subsequently have gotten close to that peak. And the reason why all of these Japanese companies have succeeded so much in the United States is because they have this design it in America for American consumers mindset, and that's why we have a unique to the American market Camry and Accord, and those cars sell like absolute hotcakes because they are designed here by people who understand the U.S. market. The German approach, the Volkswagen approach, has been almost sort of hubristic in this sense. Not hubristic, that's to imply America is God, but they have taken this approach that, Americans don't know best. I in the course of me doing research on this, whenever it was, I remember this anecdote about, cup holders, is that Americans need cup holders, and they had to bring an entire German team to the U.S. and they made them go to McDonald's for breakfast and eat the food, the food while they were driving and get a giant American coffee in a Volkswagen. And then only then after they made them do this, the Volkswagen of America made them do this because like we need fucking good cup holders in order to sell cars in the U.S. Only after they made them do this to the Germans physically in L.A. during rush hour did they were like, oh, okay, I guess we have to put different cup holders in these cars. The approach towards America was always sort of afterthoughty or always sort of let us try and cram the German solution or the European solution into the U.S. market, and that's why their sales have always been
even worse.
marginal.
They would say, look, I ran the U.S. presence of a German company that I co-founded in college, and the Germans' attitude on this always was, you're buying a German product because you want our product, so therefore we're going to do it our way. And the response to that was, hold on, wait a second. There are certain things about your product we want, but it has to pass at least minimum muster for what we expect in this country, and they don't get that. And when they do it big fucking Germans. I can say this begrudgingly and fuck it up on purpose. M5.
And then they're like, see, look,
E60
Americans
M5?
don't want this.
That was a perfect example. They took a transmission out of the 545i, said, fuck you, put it in there, and then made it so you couldn't disable traction and stability control because we don't have the resources to test the durability of this shit. That was a complete fuck you to the BMW North American market for saying we need a manual transmission in this car. And the Germans were like, no, SMG's better. Yeah. Germans do not want to be told what to do, and this happens to this day.
Despite all of the dominance of Volkswagen in the world and becoming the biggest car company maker in the world, their U.S. efforts have always been shit. And so I think that Dieselgate is part of the response of not taking American regulations seriously. The regulations around emissions in Europe are not enforced in the same way in the U.S. When there was initial discussions about when they figured out that there was a problem, they did an analysis about what the potential exposure was for the EPA violation, and they're like, I think it'll be like $100 million or so, which is fine. We make several $1 billion a year. We can certainly afford that. An unwillingness to sort of localize or understand the power of the EPA in the United States as compared to the equivalents in Europe, which is fragmented and sort of the enforcement teeth here.
Well, so there is no enforcement in Europe for violations of this kind. They're sort of very loose and whatever, and they sort of assumed, again, we're a European company, we're going to do this thing the European way. We do these sort of tricks in Europe. They were playing the same tricks in Europe. Everybody plays the same tricks, right? We talked about this a couple episodes ago. The headlights, everyone is bullshitting the headlights. Everyone cheats on government regulations. The difference here was VW had the ego to think that they were going to have the same pull in the US, even though they're this big in our market, that they would have the same pull that they have in Germany. And the second thing is, when Germans get pushed into a corner, they double down on their story culturally. And so it didn't matter that the guys in the U.S. were waving a flag going, we are fucked. They were like, just don't tell the EPA anything. Don't tell CARB anything.
They're asking for data. Give them this data. Right. It's a bunch of gobbledygook, but at first pass, it looks credible.
And it might have gone very, very differently for Volkswagen.
Have they not spent years
fucking lying about it?
Yeah, doubling down on it.
So, but I wonder how much, you and I have talked about this.
How much is Piëch?
How much is Piëch's fault versus Winterkorn's fault?
Yeah, and then you have to ask, like, what is the company culture and how much of that is... It's not a direct, like, cause and effect, but it's sort of like, what is the company culture that is established? And if you could ever attribute it to a single person,
right?
Piëch is the big personality in that company.
Yeah.
Normally you'd say it's cultural and it's the whole company and it's a collective thing, but the fact of the matter is nobody has ever had that kind of pull, I think, in any car company ever, perhaps. I mean, short of people who founded them themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
More or less.
I mean, you're talking Soichiro.
But in the modern era, none of these are family companies.
Oh, Elon.
Okay,
Elon has far more pull than.
Yes.
Here's the thing: is I think we always anthropomorphize companies. We say the company has a conscience, and the company felt this way, and the company. That's bullshit. That doesn't exist. Companies are a collection of people.
Right.
The question is there somebody at the top who instills the ability for people to do the right thing? And then where does that stop? Piëch we talked about a couple episodes ago, but the sort of prostitution scandal where they were at that high level, that fucking happens everywhere. I'm sorry. I mean, is it right? No, but it just kind of happens everywhere.
It's a reflection of lack of strong internal controls, I guess.
Or is it an understanding of people are going to be people and we're just going to have to do, we weren't there, right? So we don't know what deals were negotiated versus... we don't know what was really going on. We do know that he brought in Ignacio Lopez and then distanced himself from that. But he wanted to he wanted to succeed on purchasing. I don't think he ever wanted to screw anyone. I don't think that was his intention. His intention was to just win.
Yeah,
and
to get the people
win
needed to
fairly.
Do that. Yes.
That's why I don't like the idea of attaching Dieselgate to him. We're going to find out. Winterkorn's about to go to trial, right? But Winterkorn, his attitude, right? He was a screamer. He was yelling at people all the time. He was belittling people.
He'd break shit.
And he'd break shit. He was a disciple of Piëch, for sure. Piëch installed him there.
Yes, after the Piëchisode thing.
After that fell apart. And Winterkorn did well for a long enough time concentrating on shareholder value and all the things that Piëch did. But I didn't see such a huge... I don't know. I met the man a couple times. Like I said, I didn't particularly care for him. I thought he was dumb as fuck, right? Which if Piëch put him in that role, there's no way he is, right? I was wrong. But I just didn't get the, wow, this man is a genius vibe from him. And all I know is he knew, as far as I can tell, he definitely knew about the the cheat devices. He's the one that should have immediately said, stop this shit. What the fuck is wrong with you? Right? If your leader says, here's the goal, 407 kilometers an hour, 1,000 horsepower, 4 turbochargers, 16 cylinders, 4-wheel drive, whatever, blah, 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 and you can't do it, it's on you to fucking leave, which is half the Phaeton team did. I don't know if Piëch would have ever put up with that. I don't think he was okay with half measures and marketing stunts. He would have said, you either make the clean diesel work or we'll change and pivot. Maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe I'm blinded by all of his successes, but I don't see failures that were based on trickery. I saw successes that were based on product. And I really hope it does come out.
But they always made everything work somehow. I don't know that this is one that they could have done.
Couldn't.
I mean, what they should have done is AdBlue. I think it would have solved.
Yeah.
But it was too expensive. And the cars, Volkswagens are smaller. There's not as much space for a tank, and it requires additional maintenance. There was any number of things they could have done, including
right. I mean, they cheated on the AdBlue cars.
Yeah,
right.
Because they were excessively miserly because they didn't want people to have to fill the AdBlue tank between oil changes because the oil change should be the shortest interval, and so they would under inject AdBlue. So that the tank would
last longer. Yeah. So they all cheated. And look, everyone was doing that. But, at what point if I'm sort of building Ferdinand Piëch up as a hero, at what point would have he said, do what it takes, right? Veyron did what it took. The car didn't do 406. The car didn't do 400, and he didn't lie about it. In the same way that, I'm sorry to say, even McLaren did. We got to raise the speed limiter to get to the speed. What kind of bullshit is that? That's not real. I'm sorry. Or SSC did, where they sped up the video footage because for whatever reason, it was all real. And the reason that we respect Piëch era cars so greatly is because the substance was there. Are the cars perfect? No. Drive an R32 and tell me it doesn't put a smile on your face. Drive a Phaeton on normal driving and tell me it's not a spectacularly driving car. Drive a Veyron and tell me it's not one of the most amazing automotive achievements of all time. And then get out of it and drive an XL1 and say it's just as well engineered a solution and it's fucking unbelievable despite its flaws. And so I have a hard time saying that this guy would have, in his character, at least the character that I build in my mind of him, evil, speeches and all, would have never put up with that shit. He would have never accepted it.
Yeah, I think his role is not so direct, as more as he made a contribution to the company culture that I think created an environment that then was ripe for
that sort of line.
But
was that contribution? Was that contribution Winterkorn? Did the buck stop at Winterkorn? Should he have said? Again, we're going to find out. Should he have said no at some point and told, "Hey, Freddie." Well, who knows what he called, but hey, Freddie Carl, we got a fucking problem here. Do you think he did that, or do you think he just said, I'm going to shut up as a disciple of Piëch? I'm going to shut up, say nothing for once. I don't know. Well, we may never know.
Yeah.
But there was a point I was going to make to wrap it around to the beginning. I don't remember what it was.
Well, that would have been very tidy.
It would have been tidy because we're probably like an hour and 25 minutes in.
Okay.
There was, oh, God damn it. I said things about XL1s, and then you said something that I was like, that's a really good point, because you make good points, and then I was supposed to wrap it around. Corporate culture, I don't know.
Well, that was very compelling.
Yeah, sorry.
Hopefully the long-awaited Piëchisode delivered nonetheless.
I don't know. I haven't seen it yet, but
I meant this one.
Oh, this one. Okay, yeah. I haven't seen this one yet either.
Fair.
Other than the sneezing and sniffling and whatever else on my side, I
think he is one of the most important and impactful and greatest, in spite of his.
I remember.
There you go.
Okay,
Go
you
for it.
said you think that he sort of his influence was indirect, right? And so I say that all the time when people say, "Oh, blame the president for gas prices or whatever." The president has no direct influence on this. A lot of economic decisions are made from above that sort of have slower, more muted and indirect changes. Elon is the example of the other way around. Elon says something on fucking Twitter, and it's just going to happen at Tesla. I think the fact that Volkswagen's trajectory did a huge nosedive right after Piëch left. So Piëch, his final thing I made in the video sound like he triumphantly left Volkswagen knowing he'd done it all.
No.
That's not the case at all.
Not at all.
He got into a war of wits, and he said he
got
found
into
out
a war of not just wits, I would say like pigheadedness, like a war of stubbornness.
Well, what got him was he said he was distancing himself from Winterkorn.
Yes.
And then that started a battle between him and Winterkorn, and he ultimately lost that battle.
Correct.
He had previously, this is a key point, for this man who appears to be so evil in his speeches, the reason he was able to ascend to power and remain power at Volkswagen is he always sympathized with the workers.
Correct.
And as a government-owned, partially owned government corporation, the workers have an outsized... The sort of workers' unions have an outsized amount of power
this
at
is unique
Volkswagen.
to Germany, and it is also in, I think it's Lower Saxony, that the state owns 20% of the company, and they therefore have a voting seat.
Yeah, and they have far more power than they otherwise would, given their
He knew to align himself with workers, and he
Right.
almost always did throughout the course of his career.
And so, from a worker's perspective, he was a good guy, right?
Yeah.
And so he was doing
He
whatever.
looked after their interests, and for example, when they needed to turn Volkswagen around for profitability, and right after he became CEO, rather than shit can a bunch of people, he said, "Look, we're going to go to 4-day work weeks, and we're going to have a little bit of pay cuts, but nobody's going to lose their job, and nobody's going to go hungry."
He never laid off anyone.
He shit canned a bunch of people at Audi, I think.
Shit canned or laid off?
Laid off.
Really? I thought. I
think
when
at
I was
Audi, and then and that's why when he took control of Volkswagen.
Yes, I'm sorry. Early on, he did.
Yes,
but once he was at Volkswagen, he never
did at Volkswagen. That's
Right,
right,
and
because of the experience at Audi, where he had seen what the actual real. This is like the moment you see some possible humanity.
Yeah.
To him, is that when he saw the sort of impact that layoffs had on sort of like
somebody showed an engineer
crying
and his
engineers
wife showed up with their
outside his
kids and
office,
said,
yeah.
"Can you? We don't have money to put food on the table." So he was, regardless of whether his his motivation was his own financial strength or not, he was sort of aligning himself with the workers. And so he positioned himself in all these different ways that were great, and it all came to an end when Winterkorn won the power struggle. Yeah. And it started when he said, I'm distancing
Publicly,
myself.
He said that, yeah.
Winterkorn, that was right when he found out.
Which is normally his traditional way of getting rid of an executive. Yeah. That's, I think, fairly similar to what he did to get rid of Piëchisode.
Yeah, he did it with everyone. He would just
He said he was a great executive, I think is what he said. And there was
yeah.
some statement in a publication, and that's how he would publicly... undermine someone.
It would sort of start this undermining process, and then he would always win. He didn't win this one.
This was the one. The last one was the one he didn't win.
But he did that. This was right after he found out about Diesel. Right after he was officially told about Dieselgate, is when he said, "I'm distancing myself from Winterkorn." So either that was the first he heard of it, or it was a smart political move.
Yeah, because it ensured that he got out of the organization before Dieselgate broke.
And there's never been any accusation that he had any knowledge of this. This is what I want to know, is why didn't anyone, unless there was no evidence, ever say, "Hey, Piëch, was it because he was so old at that point?
Or so untouchable, or so scary?"
He was really scary. But yeah, I find that so interesting. And I look at what happened with Volkswagen, the ID group. Like I'm perhaps unnecessarily hard in the video. Like I said, we got an ID disaster. But the ID3, let me be very clear, was a complete disaster for the company. They started this new project with this new electric car brand that should have been ahead of the game and put them on par with Tesla earlier than anyone else because of their penance from Dieselgate. Should have given them a sort of head start. And the ID3 sat idle on the production lines for 1 year. They had to idle an entire plant while they went back and redid all the back end UX and infotainment stuff and fired the guy. So in Germany, you have an Aufsichtsrat, which is the supervisory board, and then a Vorstand, which is a management board. And they had to fire a Vorstand, a member of that management board. That is impossible to do in German, like under German law. You cannot fire them. He didn't fire him. They moved him to head of. He's a head of some department that doesn't exist. It's a bullshit title, but they're still churning through people on this ID and this, Volkswagen E, like it's their iOS basically. They're churning through people. They can't figure this shit out. Everything fell apart after Piëch died and left and then died.
In that order.
In that order. And so I think he had sort of, for a long period of time, he had a very hands-on sort of Elon Muskian direct influence. And then once he was in the supervisory board, everything he did sort of had to happen through Winterkorn. And I'm super curious if he knew about it, but knowing what he did and he actually did accomplish, I don't think that's fair to assume that he would have been okay with Dieselgate. So,
I'd love to find out if we ever could.
I hope that the Winterkorn trial gets a lot of coverage in English language news because I'm fascinated by that. First of all, he can't come to America, or maybe they'll extradite him. I don't know, but I would love to hear that trial to know who knew what.
Yeah, I mean, there's got to be evidence.
There is. I mean, they know that Winterkorn knew about it.
Yeah, but I mean, linking Piëch.
Yeah, linking Piëch. Interesting. But more importantly, I mean, there have been, as I said in the video, there have been discrete chapters of the automotive industry where one person's vision and product really did influence the rest of the industry. And we have certainly the importance of Toyota, and we have certainly the importance of Soichiro Honda. But the sort of titans, the biggest people ever, were the Daimler, who sort of invented the car, and Ford, who sort of made it mass producible. And then sort of Toyota really did sort of commoditize the car. And then you go, I think, straight to Piëch. And so from the 1970s
and what would you characterize as his legacy? Sort of bringing to full modesty. I'm just trying to distill it into like a single phrase.
Finalizing the development of the automobile.
The gasoline, the internal combustion car.
Yeah.
Basically bring it to its ultimate state.
Yeah, and it was less about the engine, I feel like, with him, even though W's and whatever.
But the car
of
that,
car, yeah.
That category, because obviously now we've moved on to the next phase, which is the EV.
And Mercedes did, by the way. Mercedes did really finance most of the development of the car. It was Audi and Mercedes that were really inventing everything, but Piëch owned everything from Skoda to Bugatti, and Mercedes never did.
Yeah, and I would say Mercedes was at its peak sort of 1 to 2 decades prior to the VW group.
Yeah. Yeah,
if you had to choose the era of maximum impact for Mercedes, it probably ends in the late 80s, early 90s.
Well, the problem with Mercedes is that their impact was direct on their cars, and then it would then slowly trickle down to other people's cars over decades. Yeah. And Volkswagen, the effect was immediate because they were Volkswagen to everything else.
Right.
But
so
clearly,
every consumer who was interested in a car at any price point could access that the VW group's.
And there's no question in my mind, and I think we originally were going to have a new Tesla Model 3 in the Icons video and just have it drive through the background of that scene where what's the next chapter? We don't know, right? And it was either going to be a Cybertruck or a Model 3 because there's just, I'm sorry to say, no question that Piëch's chapter handed off the baton to Elon Musk's.
Yes.
Right? And whether you like Elon, you like the cars, whatever, this right now, the automotive industry is completely defined by Tesla and everything it does. And we have a new Model 3 Performance, and we have the Cybertruck, which just changes the way engineers look at cars. We're now firmly in the Elon Musk chapter, but so I thought it was time, really, in Icons, and we've obviously thought this for a while here, to look back at that Piëch chapter because it was one hell of a chapter of everything that we can enjoy. You can get into a Mark IV 1.8T and know there Piëch touched that to an R32, to a Veyron, to like a Seat Cupra.
Yeah. Yep. He's a hell of a dude.
Was. Yep.
Not unlike Piëchisode as an executive. Who was.
I would never want to meet Piëch.
Well, I don't think there's a risk of that since he died in 2019.
Yeah, no, but I mean, I was at auto shows where he was there, but it was he was too scary. He was sort of larger than life, and scarier than Dr. Evil. But I wonder, he at least had. I said that in the Icons video, that was one line. He obviously had at least some self-awareness that he knew he must have known he was pretty awkward and pretty intimidating, because he's like, no one would have ever hired someone like me. I respect the hell out of that. You want to be an asshole? Go ahead. But you're doing it for the product
and for
the
such a metric shitload about cars. There's too many executives who are not, subject matter experts.
Right. Or they just only care about shareholder value or other kind of, look at that dickwad from Boeing right now.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and of course, wealth has a big part to do with it. If your compensation package is directly tied to shareholder value, you are going to care a lot about shareholder value. But if you own so much of Volkswagen and Porsche, however directly or indirectly, then you're insulated to sort of empire build and think about legacy and not your own paycheck.
I think about, when I talk about him being a bad executive, I really love the comparison of him to a Boeing dude. I can't remember his name. I hope a plane falls on him. But, Boeing returned something like $37 million in shareholder value throughout the 2010s to the company by buybacks. And it was just all distributions and buybacks and all financial tools that I don't understand and I hate, that are publicly traded tools to fuck a company out of money and make a bunch of millionaires even richer. And the amount of money that it reinvested and gave to its shareholders would have been enough to develop 2 full brand new planes, one completely from scratch to replace the 737 and one to replace the 777. I just read that the other day. And that's in a 10-year span. This company did that. That is the sign of a bad executive.
I mean, it's getting bled out, basically.
Yeah, they bled out the company. And what's happening? People are dying in actual plane crashes. Doors are flying off. Fucking wheels are flying off. The planes are just piles of shit. And this man gets to keep his money. Fuck him. On the other hand, you have somebody who's like, I don't care about shareholder value. I just want to make great products. I want to win races. I want to shit on Peugeot. I want to,
shit on the French.
I want to shit on everyone. Right? I just want to shit on everyone, but I want to do it with substantive
cars
product.
In the world.
Done. That is my idea of a hero.
With 73 exclamation points.
Right, exactly.
Like a lot of exclamation points.
Well, actually, knowing him, just a eye twitch and a fucking
and a freaking timing slip from a Veyron.
Yeah, exactly. Boom. There's
the receipts.
Yeah. Amazing career. Amazing story.
Absolutely. I'm glad we finally got to tell the story.
And it only took us, 4 years and an hour and a half.
Yep.
Jake is passed out. He's on the floor in a puddle of saliva. Okay. Thank you guys all for joining. I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did.
Yes.
I did.